I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of the Provo Municipal Council. Today is Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021. Time is 5:37 p.m. Meetings of the Municipal Council are now being held in hybrid fashion. Members of the public may continue to view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chamber at the Provo City Center. The mayor, councilors, city staff, and any presenters are participating in the council chamber or by using Zoom webinar or telephone dial-in. The coronavirus pandemic is not yet over, but vaccines are available. We encourage everyone who is eligible to get vaccinated. We encourage all people to protect themselves and others by following the protocols set by the CDC and our state and local health departments. Please stay safe and be kind. This meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking so as to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. We have with us tonight 6 council members in person, plus George Hanley, who's participating remotely. So all council members are participating. We're also joined by Mayor Kafusi and Wayne Parker, our CIO, and Brian Jones, city attorney, along with members of council and administrative staff. The opening prayer tonight will be given by Councilor David Hardy.
Father in heaven, we are grateful to thee for the community that we live in and for our state and country. We're grateful for the freedoms that we enjoy and for the freedom of self-governance. We ask thee for a blessing upon all the people of Provo and bless us that we may represent them well and may be guided in the decisions we make on their behalf. We ask for a blessing upon the staff and employees of the city. Please keep them safe and be with them as they go about their duties. We ask for a blessing upon those who are sick from the pandemic, and particularly ask for a blessing upon those who are caring for those who are sick and those who are striving to abate the pandemic. And this we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. The Pledge of Allegiance will be provided by Councilor Travis Hoban.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. It's now time for the public comment portion of our meeting. And let's see, we don't use the video anymore, do we? As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following the presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, up to 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is not on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium. Those participating on Zoom will need to use the raised hand feature to indicate that they wish to comment. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. Okay, I'm not seeing any comments here in the chambers. Trying to bring up my list.
Following the order of the item numbers.
These are the items that that are on the agenda for tonight. And so right now we are asking for any public comment on items that are not on this agenda. And yes, we will be going in that order.
Oh.
And I'm not seeing anyone with a hand raised on Zoom either. So we will now close public comment and move on to the action portion of our agenda. The first item of business, it's proposed that we approve the following minutes from the May 18th, 2021 council meeting and the June 15th, 2021 council meeting. Are there any objections or requested changes to either of those? Seeing none, I'll declare those minutes approved by unanimous consent. We'll now move on to action agenda item number 2, a resolution appropriating $300,000 in the Legacy CIP Fund for a Hillside and Canyons Plan, River and Lakeshore Plan, and Gateway Plan. If any members of the public would like to give a comment for this item, you're encouraged to call in or sign in now. This item is to be presented by David Mortensen, our budget officer.
Thank you, Chair Sewell, and good afternoon or evening, I guess, to the council and mayor and Mr. Parker. So a few months ago, the Legacy CIP Fund was created by the council to allocate funds that could be used for projects throughout the city that would be of long-term benefit to the residents of Provo. Since that time, there have been multiple appropriations out of those funds. Tonight, we're asking the council to consider an appropriation of $300,000 from that fund to be used for 3 specific long-term plans that would benefit Provo. Those are the Hillside and Canyons Plan, River and Lakeshore Plan, and Gateway Plan. We do have Director of Community and Neighborhood Services, Gary McGinn, here, if there's any specific questions about those plans. And I would just let you know that after this appropriation, there would be $429,000 remaining in the Legacy CIP funds to be appropriated at a later time. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Just want to make sure that we know that the 300 will cover all 3 and wonder what that process is from here.
It's our best estimate that this is what they will cost. We have looked at these plans. We've tried to be conservative. The process here is, our intent is to move forward as a change order to our current contract with Design Workshop. If for some reason that didn't work out and we could not go forward with that, we would take our scope of work and go out for a request for proposals. And based on what we think the scope is and our conversations about what we need, again, we think we've been conservative.
So there's nothing in code that requires an RFP process if we do a change order on an existing.
But typically, yes. If we want to do a plan like this, we would go through an RFP process. However, if we already have a contract with a vendor, which we do with Design Workshop, who is providing services for us. If we expand the scope of that contract, you can do that without going through an RFP process. And we'll work through those issues with the purchasing division in the city to make sure that we're doing things appropriately and that an RFP is not needed.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Mortensen. We'll now open this item for a public hearing. Are there any members of the public that wish to comment on this item? Not seeing anyone at the podium or online with a raised hand, so we will close the public hearing and bring it back to the council for any discussion. Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I just wanted to express my support for this. It's something that we've talked about in various committees. I think good planning is worth its weight in gold, to measure twice and cut once. And that's what we're trying to do with the public funds here, is dive a little deeper into our general plan process, optimize that process, and create great policies for our gateway corridors, as well as our natural resources in the foothills around the Provo River and the Lakeshore.
Mr. Fillmore.
I feel to absolutely say ditto to what Councilwoman Ellsworth has said. I think one of the most important things that this council does is long-term planning. We've just always got to be thinking 10, 20, 30, 40 years out. And this is absolutely critical. It's the absolutely right time to do it. It connects with our general plan. So very much encouraged by the council's support on this.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, I will call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, before you move to the next item, could I just take a minute and acknowledge Mr. Mortensen? This will be his last council meeting with us. He will be leaving us about mid-month to become the new finance director in the city of Vineyard, neighboring community, and super excited about this great career move for him. He's done a really excellent job as our budget officer, and just wanted to acknowledge that before he got out the door, and out the door this evening as well as out the door later this month. So anyway, just wanted to let you know and express our appreciation as administration.
Thank you. And we'd like to express our appreciation as a council also, Mr. Mortensen, for your excellent work for the city. And Vineyard's gain will be our loss. Moving on to item number 3, which is an implied motion on an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 26 acres of real property generally located near the access area to Slate Canyon, from single-family residential to open space preservation and recreation zone. If any members of the public would like to give a comment for this item, you're encouraged to call in or sign in now. And this item will be presented by Melissa McNally, Management Analyst.
Good evening. The proposed parcel property is at the mouth of Slate Canyon. We are proposing a zone change from an R110 of approximately 26.11 acres to the open space zone designation. I just want to, for clarification, a question was brought up in work session today about the parcel that's just north. That parcel is already zoned open space. That was done when the open space zone was initially created. So that's all taken care of. This parcel is located in the critical hillside overlay. So we feel like it's ideal to zone this into the open space preservation zone. There are no current development plans for this parcel. And the feedback that we received from the neighborhood was positive and in favor of this zone. And the feedback from Planning Commission was a unanimous vote to approve the zone, an approval recommendation to the council. Do you have any questions?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now open this item for public comment. Not seeing anyone here in the chambers or online wishing to make a comment, so we will close public comment and bring this back to the council for any discussion. This is the first time that we've heard this item since it's come from the Planning Commission, so I need to also ask if any two council members desire to consider this item again at the next council meeting. Seeing not and seeing no comments, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion. All in favor?
Yes.
And that motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to item number 4, which is an implied motion on an ordinance amending the Provo City General Plan to adopt an intent statement for the Westside development policies and Southwest area future land use map. If any members of the public would like to give a comment for this item, you're encouraged to call in or sign in now if you're participating remotely. And this item will be presented by Hannah Salsel, planner.
There were some inaccuracies in the report that staff had made and presented to Planning Commission that differed from what Councillor Harding had intended. So I believe he was going to make a brief statement just explaining what we're actually discussing tonight so we're all on the same page. And then I'll share the relevant Planning Commission feedback for those topics.
Thank you. So as we discussed in the work meeting earlier, the draft that was shared with the Planning Commission was an older draft. I think it was originally presented to the council, but was not the most recent one that was discussed. And just a clarification, and it's clearer in the second draft that there's no recommended changes to the policy on density. It's actually just a reaffirmation of what was adopted with the future land use map. Just try to clarify that. There appeared to be some, again, miscommunication and misunderstanding. The Planning Commission report has a recommended denial of the general plan amendment, but what was being proposed was not a general plan amendment, but an intent statement, which would ask the Planning Commission and the city planners to develop some ordinance language that could become a general plan amendment. And in that, they did recommend that the council consider some of these policies, and that's actually what the intent statement is doing, is asking the Planning Commission and the city planners to consider, and developing those policies and then presenting them, proposing them to the council. So I just wanted to make note those things.
Thank you, Councillor Harney.
So just to reiterate, make sure everyone's on the same page. Residential areas, the big yellow blobs on the land use map will remain 4 units to the acre net, which is lower than 4 units to the acre gross. That is what it is in the land use map. It will continue to be that way. We're just discussing other levels of housing type integration. So I've got summaries on the slides here. I'll try not to just read them. This will be for the council, slightly repetitive, but for the public, hopefully new. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the council had referred this to the planning commission so that staff could brief them, have a public hearing, and make recommendations to the council, which have been completed. It's now back to the council for discussion. The public sent letters, had the public hearing from planning commission, and responded on open city hall. There was general opposition to mandating the required higher level of integration with housing types. A greater granularity is a word you'll see a lot, especially from developers and real estate agents and landowners who wanted the flexibility to do what they wanted with their land when they chose to sell and develop it. Similar on open city hall. It was somewhat supported on open city hall, which was unique among the other comment methods. The planning commission recommended denial of what staff had been calling a general plan amendment, but the intent statement. They also recommended that the council consider requiring or encouraging housing type integration citywide, that if this was important enough to discuss for the west side, then it was maybe important enough to discuss for the rest of Provo, or that maybe other housing types belonged better on other sides of Provo, and the west side could be used for some of this missing step up, upgraded, larger, more expensive homes that we have a shortage of in Provo as well. They encouraged that whatever document comes out of this be very clear, very legible, have very Provo relevant pictures showing the level of density that is being suggested. And that, that it was universally agreed, though, that Provo does need more homes at a variety of price points so that residents within a neighborhood have the option to live there, whether they're stepping up, stepping down, or moving in for the first time. Do you have any questions for me on Planning Commission or the public's feedback? Okay. I'll be on hand if you have. Oh, yeah.
I guess my question is, where does what the planning feedback was break with what the intent statement was? Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. So
yeah,
intent statement was, requiring diversity of housing types. It seems like the planning commission is saying that might be a good idea. Maybe do it on all Provo, not just one area of town. Is that, so that was a break point?
Yeah, it didn't seem like the planning commissioners were united in their reasoning behind it. Some thought that, as I explained, there were some different reasons for encouraging it citywide, but they did vote all but unanimously. There was one who voted against recommending consideration of a citywide integration policy.
And then was there discussion on minimum size? Did they come to any kind of conclusion on minimum size where integration might be, proposed, or where that intense language would apply? Because I know that was a discussion point, but was there any kind of, did they come to any kind of agreement on what that minimum size should be, or the minimum percentage integration that should exist?
No, there was also a general feeling from most of the commissioners that it should not be mandated or required, but perhaps incentivized or encouraged in other ways, so that they could alleviate the concerns of some of those landowners and developers who wanted that flexibility to sell and develop how they wanted. They could still have that, but there would be incentives for offering that level of integration.
So when we made the comment that they discussed minimum development size, that was only in terms of incentive, not because we would mandate above a certain development size.
Yes, and if it were to go citywide, I'm sure that number would be different. So I think in changing the context of the discussion, it changed the requirements. So they didn't spend much time on the requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Right, thank
I'll be
you.
on hand if you have any more questions.
Thank you. All right, we'll open this item for a public hearing then. Please remember to state your name and city of residence.
Oh, hi. My name is Bradley Korth. I live in Provo. Right now, I'm a BYU student. I live pretty close to campus, just on the west side of it. And when I thought about what 4 units to the acre meant, I realized that's actually not very high density. Thinking of my parents' last house in Arizona, which had a lot size about 9,075 square feet. And I thought, okay, looked up how big is an acre? It's about 43,000 something square feet. You could fit a little bit more than 4 of those. And the actual inside of the house was almost 3,000 square feet. I'm like, so that's not really a particularly small house. So I didn't really think of it as 4 units to the acre as being very high density. Now, I'm not against single family homes, but I think it's important to be able to have a lot of different apartments in different sizes because of people's different incomes. Some people feel like they don't need anything big. And so we need to, having a lot of options available is helpful, and and if you can have the city and when the city doesn't grow out so much, yet the population still increases, not as much money has to be spent on infrastructure to provide for all the residents, because it's a little bit more dense in certain areas. And also greater walkability can help with traffic, not needing as much parking. I use the bus around and I'm pretty happy that there is one here. So yeah, those are my comments.
Thank you. Does staff have access to the timer that we normally display? Okay, thank you.
Dave knows to put me on a timer.
That was coincidental.
I don't think so. Jonathan Hill, Fort Utah Chair. Great to be with you guys. I think Planning Commission was a very good and interesting discussion. If you have not had a chance yet, I highly recommend you go and watch the videos of both weeks that we did it. The first meeting, I presented as a land use map committee member. Dave Harding presented. They had a great discussion back and forth, answering a lot of the questions that have come up. And then the second week, of course, they had the public comment brought in and added to that. Now, just a couple of things I'm going to highlight. You guys know the neighborhood position by this point. Hannah did a good summary of it. The neighborhood generally does not support this change. And going through Planning Commission was very interesting because you're right, there is some confusion here, right? It seems a little bit conflicting on what they were saying, but I think the key is in the scale. As Hannah said, most planning commissioners said diversity of housing types is a good thing. We need that. But they felt like this intent statement, and they knew the document, whether they had the right name for it or not, they knew the document, kind of went too far in certain ways. Commissioner Urquiaga specifically commented that she wanted to see more of an incentive or a recommendation rather than a requirement. Commissioner Knudsen, whose comment I noticed didn't make it here, talked about landowners and keeping the flexibility that they need to develop their land. And also several others made the comment that different types of housing fit in different areas and at different densities. And they wanted to make sure that there was flexibility. So the bottom line is, while diversity of housing types and income points and everything is good, we need to have more flexibility and differences in order to integrate this. And they did say, if we're going to integrate this on the west side, we shouldn't just be forcing it there. We should be spreading that throughout the city and looking at how can we make something that's flexible enough to be applied across the whole city. In fact, one of the commissioners pulled up a Zillow map and he said, I want to show an example of what I think good mixture looks like. And he showed a neighborhood just north of Timpview High, and it was all single family detached, but it had a variety of price points due to different lot sizes, things like that. And so, he said, this is a type of integration that we can have that brings different income levels together, but maybe not to the exact extent and granularity that we're seeing, at least in the picture that was shown to them as kind of the ideal block of what we're looking for. So in the end, we're hopeful that this might be a good chance for us to step back with this, look at it carefully, bring public input in, and find something that everybody can get on board with, instead of just pushing something through very quickly. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you guys might have for me.
So, Mr. Hill, am I understanding you correctly that you feel that significant majority of the current citizens in the southwest area would favor roughly maintaining the status quo, moving forward with some integrated housing, but primarily single-family units, more open space, and that whatever affordable or diverse housing may come would need to be high-quality design standards to blend in well?
Right, exactly. And you know, it's interesting. People move to different neighborhoods for different experiences, right? They're looking for a certain type of feel experienced within a neighborhood, and different people look for different things. I've lived on a farm and I've lived in New York City, and you meet people that want very different things when they look for what neighborhood they're going to live in. And the people on the west side want that more open space, slower feel kind of thing. Now, with that, I think it's interesting, and Dave Harding emphasized this well, the intent statement does not change the density. And that was something that came up at Planning Commission as well. Dave Anderson very pointedly asked, can we up the density in the area? And David Day actually answered that and said, at this point, we've planned out all the sewage infrastructure. We're already installing that sewage infrastructure. It involves pipes that have been laid under I-15 years ago. We cannot change the infrastructure without huge costs to the city. And so while higher density can always be a question that's asked, in this case, at least Public Works was saying to Planning Commission, that's not something we should consider here.
So a significant level of high density would outpace the infrastructure that's been put in, you're saying?
It is. And, you know, the map that in this proposal would remain does have different densities in different places, but it averages out to 4 units gross across the whole area. And that's the number that Public Works says they need to have. You can distribute that differently to create more variety, but you got to stay to that number overall.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Becky Bogdan, Lakewood Neighborhood Chair. I would like to ditto what Jonathan said. The Planning Commission, they had some interesting conversations the last 2 times that they presented. I was there as well. But I would like to ditto that too, that the majority of the Westside citizens, they would prefer the single family detached homes. The one thing that I have found, at least within my own neighborhood, are the LDR nodes. They would really prefer those 3 different housing types, not just 3 different types of townhomes. And so things like that there, I can see more integration and different plays there, but there you have more units to the acre when you're working with 15 units to the acre versus 4 units to an acre. I'd also like to reiterate what I've been sending you guys, what Planning Commission has been talking about with Southeast Provo. Having the poverty levels isn't just Southeast Provo. We're downtown Provo. We're also Westside Provo. I'm really concerned about that. The schools are really concerned about that. We really do need some of these bigger homes to balance some of that out so that we can have, we do have homes for school teachers. My husband's one, you all know that. We do have homes for police officers. A lot of people choose not to live in Provo. They choose to live in Spanish Fork for other reasons. My husband has colleagues that live in Spanish Fork. They live in Santaquin for different reasons. He also has some that start out here in Provo and then they move to Orem or other areas for bigger homes because we just don't have that supply in our stock here. And so I would like to ask you guys to consider all that in your decision. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Rick Smith. I live in the Fort Utah neighborhood. As I've stated before to you, I am opposed to the intent statement as it's currently crafted. However, I have to tell you that I was very impressed with the thoughtful discussion that was had at the Planning Commission. And based upon that, I feel more optimistic and more hopeful that given some time and some additional study, that this actually could be a positive thing for the city. The issues that were raised and that were discussed by the commissioners were right on point. They had a lot of thoughts and ideas about ways to make it work for the entire city. And I was very pleased to hear that. So I would strongly urge you to not do anything with it yet. Maybe send it back to the Planning Commission and allow them to do further development, further study, and really look at this carefully and in a way where it could be acceptable to the majority of the residents of the city and make a difference for the entire city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Chriselle Travis with DR Horton. I'm glad that this has made its circle. I would echo again the sentiments of the neighborhood chair. It's not often that the developers and the neighborhood chairs get along, but in this case, we would ask that you guys do take some more time to look at it. I think we're headed in the right direction. Flexibility and a written plan that's understood would be greatly appreciated on the development community side. The way that the staff is interpreting things is strictly 4 units to the acre, quarter acre lots density. There's no diversity or granularity, as they put it, in interpreting that plan as you come to places where density belongs. So I think that Southwest Provo has the opportunity, if they are willing to look at the general plan or whatever the step might be, to help developers make something that would work really great on that southwest side. Right now, we're kind of at a stalemate. I've had a piece of land under contract for a year, and we've been watching this back and forth and unable to make anything happen because of the interpretations and what needs to happen. So I'm grateful for your time in considering this and look forward to possibly working out something that would work for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Can I also say, as far as the sewer confinements and the densities, developers are willing to help. We'd be more than happy to help with infrastructure if there were incentives, as have been mentioned, that could help us achieve those things. And so I think those problems can be solved if there's a little bit more flexibility put in the box. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jason Bennett, Lehigh, Utah, Provo property owner, about 23 acres with Dan Ford, down on Lakeshore Drive. My opinion on the Westside development map is they did a whole general plan out there that has 4 units to the gross acre. And they took some parts where they did an LDR zone, BLDR, and they allowed 7 units to the acre on those. The properties that we purchased assuming that it could get at 4 units to the net acre. And in order for us to even consider putting a 4-plex mansion or twin homes, townhomes, whatever you want to put in there, it does not make financial sense unless you increase the density to 4 units to the gross acre. I feel that as a property owner there, that if we are going to have to do mixed housing types within our own development, that we should be able to use 4 units to the gross acre to make financial incentives to do it. Right now, there's not a city zone that I'm aware of that allows mixed type housings with attached and detached, anything less than BLDR zone, which is 7 units to the gross acre. So our only options right now is we go R1 8,000, which is all single detached homes, or we go BLDR zoning, which BLDR is 7 units to the acre. There's not a zoning that allows 4 units to the gross acre. And at 4 units to the net acre, there's not a zoning that allows us to have detached and attached housing. So there's not a zone in place to accommodate what's trying to be done today. So I hope our development doesn't get held up over this. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any hands raised online or any more people coming to the podium here in the chamber. So we'll close public comment at this point and open it up to the council for discussion. Mr. Harding.
Mr. Magnus, if you can pull that document up. So there was some discussion on a first draft and a second draft. This is the second draft, which I don't believe was shared with the Planning Commission, unfortunately. And so this clarifies about what's proposed, that we struggling with words today, I apologize, that we reaffirm would be, what's gross and what's net and whatnot. So that's in there. And then let me say I really appreciate the public input, and as well as the Planning Commission conversations. I agree with so much of what has been shared. There's so much that I want to respond to, and I agree with most of what has been said here. Let's see. So let me pull this up. So the report of action says, on a vote of 6-1, the Planning Commission recommends the City Council deny the above general plan amendment, and that's more than just a name. I mean, if they were under the impression that this was amending the general plan, that's very different than an intent statement that asks the Planning Commission and our planners to develop a proposal. And then it goes on, and recommended that the city consider applying the principles of the intent statement citywide with language and example artwork more suited to Provo. And the citywide was not in the intent statement, but the intent statement was looking for language and artwork to be developed. That's kind of what we're asking them to do. So for us to consider that's basically what the intent statement is asking, to asking them to help us consider these things by proposing language in the artwork. As far as it being citywide, I think it's no surprise to any of you that I'm a proponent of mixed housing types throughout the city. So I support that, and if we were to pass this intent statement, the Planning Commission and the planners could come back with a proposal that would make the citywide. I do also agree that different parts of the city should develop differently, and there's different feels. I absolutely support that as well. Particularly when we start talking about, maybe these requirements for diversity of housing types should only be applied to, say, plots over 10 acres, which I personally think is too large of a threshold. But particularly if we're talking about that, it would only apply in Southwest Provo. There's nowhere else in the city that has that kind of land that's still developable. And so that's the reason why this intent statement is very focused on Southwest Provo, because that's where we have developable land. That's not redevelopment. That's not infill development. That's greenfield development. And that's why this is, targeted towards that, as well as, remember, this is not, in my mind, this is not changing any policy that we already have in place. This is clarifying what that means, because there's become a diversity of interpretations. So this is just clarifying what we mean by these things when we approve them, or providing greater clarification in case it's a bit ambiguous. But I'd be happy to also consider something citywide. Of course, it could not be this, I guess, specific and this tailored, because this is really very much tailored to greenfield development. There's been talk about more flexibility. This was one of the biggest criticism that I've heard over the past month and a half is that this is not specific enough. There's too many, it lists a whole list of different things that could be used to satisfy this. This is actually written specifically to be very flexible. Let's see, I want to get to that last. As far as the density is concerned, I think that the two committees have put us in this came to a compromise. Back 4 years ago, Public Works said, at this point, we can make changes to our plans, but we need to know now what that number is going to be. We worked through it it was a very difficult process. We came to a compromise that the whole committee was able to recommend to the council unanimously, and the council adopted unanimously. And Public Works, are they here? I don't see them here right now, but I hate to put words into their own mouth, but what I've heard them say is that they've moved forward based on that plan, and they've developed their own plans, and they've been putting infrastructure in place for that. Let me just, so there's been a bit of confusion. There's been a bit of misunderstanding, but really what it comes down to is right now we are getting developments that if it's in the RES area, they're fairly uniformly sized, single family detached. And if it's in the LDR area, we're getting just straight townhomes. And so right now, that's how diversity of housing types is being interpreted. Over here, single family detached, all the uniform size. Over here, all townhomes. And if we're okay with that, then let's not do anything, because that's what we're getting, and that's what we'll continue to get. There's been talk of incentives. Typically, incentives, when we're talking about development, it's an increased density, which I believe is also something that the residents of the area oppose, as well as doesn't fit with our infrastructure plans and infrastructure that's in place. There's been lots of talk about, this could be a good thing. Let's just take some more time to study it and do it right. That's, in my interpretation or my understanding, that's the whole point of this intent statement. It does two things. It asks for the assistance in developing the language and whatnot for these ordinances. I'll touch on that later. And then it talks about what to do in the meantime, because to me, that's the biggest thing is what to do in the meantime. 4 years ago, we spent a lot of time in that committee developing these policies. And then we got the future land use map after that, I think 18 months after that or so. The point is since that happened, and during that time, we had the sewer barriers, so we couldn't get a lot of development during that time. Those have resolved, and already a good chunk of what we had planned has now been developed. And if we take additional time, and if we continue to approve developments and we take additional time to study this out, there won't be any land left, at least not large chunks of land left to develop. So the tough thing is what to do in the meantime while we take a deeper look. This intent statement says, let's take a deeper look. And it says, in the meantime, we're not going to approve anything that doesn't, what does it say? We do not intend to approve rezone requests without sufficient assurance that these policies will be followed within each development, meaning that diversity of housing types. And then in the meantime, in the interim, here are some ways to address the alternative housing types. And there's a long list of ways that could be satisfied. So there is that flexibility. If people don't want to wait until the Planning Commission and our planners come back with additional information, they can come forward with something that aligns with this. Otherwise, if we don't act now, and we take time to study this, with the sewer now resolved, there won't be, already a good chunk of this has already been developed with the last four that we've approved, both low density residential as well as proposals in the RES areas. Already big chunks have been developed, and that will continue to happen. So we really don't have, if we don't think this the status quo, if we don't want to continue with the status quo, then we need to do something now. The last thing I wanted to mention, unfortunately, we're not able to have that presentation we were going to have from Mr. Mills earlier, but one of his slides It says here, diversity and aesthetics allow for a more visually pleasing neighborhood, but also allows for cohesion. And I think that's something that we want in our communities. A diverse housing mix in the neighborhood allows for a broader cross-section of demographics. This generally helps the neighborhood retain its vitality for generations. And so I think we're hearing that the best practices would have a diverse housing mix. And right now we're only getting townhomes in one area, single family detached in another. And I don't think that that's building a sustainable, vibrant part of Provo. So I don't think to wrap up, I think that the intent statement is actually aligned with what the Planning Commission is asking for, more time to look into applying these principles, and gives us a path forward. So if developers want to move forward and not wait for this, the final recommendation and the final zoning, they can move forward now if they can incorporate some of these alternative housing types, and as was done 2 months ago or whatever, that mixed housing type concept plan that Mr. Bennett's team produced, on there it shows it as a VLDR, which it would need to be, and that would allow for the mixture of housing, but then also a development agreement that would cap it at a certain number of units. And with those two things, it could move forward. So there is a path forward in the interim, but this would give us more time to take a deeper look, as the residents and the Planning Commission has asked.
I just had a procedural question I'm wondering if staff could help me out with. So the Planning Commission, it was mentioned that the Planning Commission discussed a draft that was older than the one that we voted on and asked them to look at. I'm just wondering if anyone knows what happened there. Did we make changes in the meeting? I don't recall. I'm just trying to wrap my head around that.
The updated version was simply never sent to staff. So we thought there was one version we were working with and presenting that turned out to be outdated. It was the version that was discussed in the study session when Councillor Harding was there. So we had assumed if there were flags that that concern would have been raised earlier, we would be happy to take another look at it or send it back to Planning Commission for their revision of the intent statement that you intend to discuss and vote on.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, did the version that we discussed in the meeting and vote as a council to send to the Planning Commission, is that the version that they saw?
The version that was in the council packet, which I believe was the one that was discussed, is the one that was sent to Planning Commission.
Okay.
If there was another that was shared in the council meeting but not published, or that was emailed around council, but again, not published or sent to staff, I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, we don't have a better answer.
Yeah, just trying to understand what happened there. Sorry. Mr. Hoban.
Well, so should we be voting on something that the Planning Commission hasn't technically provided feedback on? I mean, I know the spirit of the document was feedback was provided on that, but does that make sense? Should this go back to Planning Commission with the correct version that then ultimately we will vote on? Or I'm still okay discussing it tonight. I have a lot of feedback, but if we want to send it back to Planning Commission and then have it come back and then discuss too, I don't know if that would be the appropriate thing to do, given that it just seems weird we're voting on something that they didn't bless or not bless.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
If I
Mr.
can just
Jones.
weigh on that real quickly and give you the ambiguous answer that that's really up to you because of the nature of what it is that you're voting on. As Councillor Harding pointed out, you're not actually voting on a general plan amendment or any changes to the code or to the general plan. You're potentially voting on a statement of intent about what the council thinks the best policy is and wants to pursue going forward. So it was only sent to Planning Commission in the first place because there was a feeling that you wanted their thoughts on that policy. So I think there's certainly an argument to be made that you don't have those thoughts on the actual policy that you're wanting to vote on. So it certainly would be not unreasonable if you did want to send it back to them and have input on the document that's been under discussion tonight. But there's no legal requirement that you do so because it wasn't something that they're required to weigh in on.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. We don't have to have the opinion or blessing of the Planning Commission, but it does feel or look insincere if we sent the wrong document to them, asked them to deliberate on it, got their opinion, and then threw it out the window because somewhere in the process things went awry. So I hate the idea of delaying this further, but to me, it would create a more sincere process in relationship with the Planning Commission to send them the correct document, get their feedback on the correct document, and take that into consideration, which I think was our initial intent.
Thank you. Mr. Hoban.
If we did decide to do that, I'd love to get some feedback from staff, from planning, I guess, or Public Works. I don't know who this would come from, but on this 4 units per acre, I know I had an initial conversation. I can't actually remember who it was, but in any case, I was told, that we can only handle 4 units per acre, but I'm curious about Crystal's comment about subsidizing that. Could we increase it if we subsidize? If developers subsidize that, and is that a slippery slope? Is that a good idea, a bad idea? So we can address that now, or if we are going to send it back, I'd love to get some feedback in the meantime before we come back to the council with that. So
On the 4 units to the acre issue as it relates to the sewer, there were some infrastructure issues on the west side dealing with sewer, lift stations, kind of bottlenecks, things like that. Public Works has done a great job of going in and fixing those. The real hurdle to density, increasing it on the west side, isn't that infrastructure anymore. It's the big lines that take the sewage, the 36-inch sewage lines that go under the freeway over to our sewage treatment plant. And those are the things that if that infrastructure were increased, then you could increase density on the west side. But that is a very significant financial cost. And I don't think Public Works has gone very far down the road at looking at that solution and what impacts to the changes they've already made that would cause. Now, having said all of that, cities all the time have a limit of capacity in their system to do things. And to increase that systemic or the system capacity, that's why you charge impact fees or other things along those lines. Our impact fees are not indexed to or geared towards anything more than 4 units to an acre. So if that were to be required, the city would need to do an extensive impact, come up with a plan of how we would be able to accommodate more units to the acre from an infrastructure standpoint, what improvements we would need to do, and then do an impact fee study to figure out how we would pay for those fees. And then at the end of that would be assuming we're talking about this compromise of 4 units to the acres. We've gone through planning on the west side over the years, many iterations of different things, a lot of community outreach. That seems to be where the community is on the west side, is that 4 units to the acre gross on average is about the feel and design of the west side. So if to broach the subject of increasing that, I think we need to go back and really do a lot more engagement with the public. We'd also need to involve Public Works on some extensive study of what that would take for infrastructure. So it's not impossible at all to do, but it is a lot of effort and work would need to go into it to make sure that we got it right.
Thank you, Mr. McGinn.
Can I ask a question to Mr. McGinn? And you may not have the answer to this. That's okay. If a hypothetical development has 4 units to the acre, are those homes going to be $1 million to $3 million, or will they be less?
It depends. So you can have diversity of housing out there, and you can have diversity of housing sizes and types, and you can have diversity of income that goes with it. And that's really what you're trying to get at the end of the day. A good community is not, and a healthy community is one that has a variety of income types within it. You have expensive homes, you have moderately priced homes, and you have starter homes. And then you have areas in your community for people to live who need housing, who fall below the low and moderate income housing standards. And so when you come in on the west side, when you look at 4 units to the acre net, and what that means is what you do is once you take out all the roads and things like that, that's how many houses you can get. So on an acre, it really comes out to be just under 3 units, 3 homes per acre. Now, we have zones existing on our books that could accommodate everything that we're talking about here. Because somebody can come in and do an R18 zone, and they could have one 20,000 square foot lot, and they could have one 8,000 square foot lot. And on the 8,000 square foot lot, they could have a home that costs, $350,000 to $400,000. And on the 20,000 square foot home, they could have a $1.5 million home. I mean, that could be done today on the west side of Provo. Partly what developers do, and I think as council staff has been trying to get these development process discussions in front of the council. One of the things I know we've been talking about is having developers come in to talk to you about how they do their pro forma, that when they go out and they see a piece of property, what they can do and how they can do it, and how the market works with it. So the market typically, there are things that are completely without our control, national issues like the cost of gasoline, the cost of lumber, the cost of labor, things like that. Then on a local level, it's the cost of land that it takes. And so usually a developer, they come in, they want to maximize their profits. And so they'll look at it and try to build a good project that meets the community's needs, but also maximizes their profit. And so we could have that variety of lot size and home size. However, if coming into an area, the most efficient way for me to do it is all single family homes on 10,000 square foot lots that I can make as big as I can and sell at all the maximum price point that I can get. The tendency in the market is to do that. And so there are things that you can do with zoning to help with that. And so when we're talking about the granularity, it's really on what basis is that granularity? Is it on an acre by acre? Or is it neighborhood by neighborhood? Or is it citywide? And so when we came originally and did the Westside plan, and we're working with the neighborhood, the planners wanted, frankly, a more fine-grained granularity out there, to have a little more mixture. The neighborhood thought, and there are people from the neighborhood can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the feeling was we already have areas with quite a few smaller homes, starter homes. What we need now to balance that and have a balanced granularity is some larger homes to be able to do that. And so that, I think, was one of the reasons why you see the map you see in front of you. It's dealing with infrastructure issues. Right now, we are incapable, unless we go through and really study the infrastructure issues, of going beyond 4 units to an acre gross. Then in the residential areas on the map, if you do it net, then you have less than 4 units to an acre, frankly. And then overall, it works, and you'll get that. I think the Planning Commission thinks that this conversation about granularity generally is a good idea and would like to go down and would be excited to have those discussions and look at it. One of the issues is, in the interim, what do we do with projects that are coming in the pipeline? And your next item is one of those projects that the neighborhood was pleased with, as far as granularity over the entire neighborhood issue. But as far as granularity on the individual project or every few acres, maybe not so much. Did that come close to answering your question, council member?
Yeah, I'm just thinking in a typical neighborhood, in a typical development, if there's a 1/4 acre lot, it's probably going to have a home that's $1 million to $3 million. Like, that's what we've been seeing in recent developments.
Yeah, I've seen in existing neighborhoods where you've got, probably a 1/4 acre lot, you're looking right around $1 million for it. When you get down around R18s, just the size of the home and somewhat the materials, but even the materials, not so much anymore, of which it's constructed, you're looking anywhere from 350, at a maximum low, to more like 400,000 and 450.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mr. Hanley?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just a couple of thoughts here. First of all, I think what Mr. McGinn is describing as the kind of diversity that would be possible and still meet the requirements for units per acre is precisely what's desirable, but we're not getting. And I think that's what's concerning me. I don't know exactly yet what the solution to that is, but I personally can't use the word granular to describe large chunks of neighborhoods that look alike, but look very different from what is across the street in another neighborhood. I think that's exactly what we want to try to avoid, and maybe we've already made some of those mistakes. I don't think anyone that I've talked to on the council is proposing anything radical here. I think it's in the spirit of what the neighborhood wants, with the exception that the neighborhood doesn't seem to want a large new development to have any variety whatsoever. I mean, I think you can have single family detached homes, as Mr. McGinn was describing, throughout the entire development, but you can have more open space that's shared by the neighborhood, and you can cluster some of the homes together more creatively than what we're seeing. And that will vary the price points for those different houses. And I think that's what we're trying to, at least for me, I'm trying to wrap my mind around how to achieve that. And I think our policies right now are not driving those kind of proposals. What we're getting are large cookie cutter kind of proposals where everything looks the same and everything's more or less at the same price point. So I think that's what we've got to try to figure out how to avoid. I think it's very unfortunate that we didn't hear Mr. Mills' presentation tonight, because I think it would have been very helpful, and it does actually speak to exactly what we're talking about here. And it does pertain to the next item as well. So I'm a little confused. I remain confused about what actually happened with the Planning Commission, what the right thing to do here is. But I think I'm in agreement that we should probably try to go back and get more feedback from the Planning Commission to clarify what they would recommend for us to achieve what appears to be a common goal that they have, that we have, and that is that we want to provide that kind of diversity of housing types and price points. Housing types is one way to get different price points, but there are also lot sizes and housing sizes that can, achieve some of that diversity. And like I say, we're just not seeing that in what's being proposed of late. So that's where my concern is. So I guess it's helpful for me to just understand what it is that I want, and that's what I'm expressing here for, in case it's useful to others. And I thought we were with this intent statement moving in that direction, however imperfectly, but I would like to keep moving in that direction rather than just sort of, wash our hands of this and move forward without any changes. I think we're going to end up with situations that are going to be regrettable down the line. I do think that one of the things that, just to underscore what was said earlier about Mr. Mills' presentation that we didn't hear, neighborhood cohesion is really very, very important. And I think we don't have to do, and maybe I do agree, I think the illustrations that were in the intent statement were not terribly useful because they created impressions that were not helpful to reflect, and were not reflective of what was in the intent statement. At least from my point of view, I think we're talking about very gentle incentives to try to vary the look and feel of the place enough so that it doesn't feel like one big block has been dropped down on 30 acres. I think we could probably improve that as well. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I don't feel I don't feel prepared to vote yes on this or no for that matter without more and clearer input from the Planning Commission with regard to the specific document that we've been discussing.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley. And I'd just like to quickly comment on Councilor Ellsworth's comment about the $1 million homes. I live in a subdivision that's 4 units to the gross acre. And I think home valuation is only loosely correlated with lot size. It really depends on what you put on the lot. Most of the homes in our neighborhood aren't worth close to $1 million, but a few that are worth more than that too, depending on, again, the kind of house that's on the lot.
Yeah.
Who's next here? Councilor Ellsworth.
Sure. I don't want to kill this conversation if we need to have it tonight, but I am interested in making a motion to continue this item and sending it back to the Planning Commission for specific clarification on the most recent version.
Okay, so that sounds like a motion to send back the most recent version to the Planning Commission for comment.
Yes.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have 2 seconds on that. I think maybe Mr. Fillmore was first, but I guess it doesn't matter. And discussion on the motion. Mr. Harding.
Just a couple points of clarification and then some discussion on what comes next. The one graphic that is actually, Mr. Magnus, can we pull up that document again and go to the slide? I think it's entitled Status Quo. I've used a few different graphics in discussing this, but the one graphic that's actually in the intent statement. Okay. Shoot, I guess I didn't send you the other one, but the one graphic that is in the intent statement, which yeah, I'll scroll up. No, I guess it's at the bottom. Sorry. It's not the map, the one graphic. That was weird. That's in there. The intent statement refers to that for the LDR area. So And I absolutely agree with the comments. Like if we're going to create actual ordinance language and create official policies, then it should have graphics that better correspond with the RES type areas. But that the one graphic that is in there is not supposed to be for the 4 units to the acre areas. It's supposed to be for the LDR 12 units to the acre type areas. And that's so, and if we could get it up there, it explicitly sets that this is for the LDR area, not for the other area. We have had some talk about bigger homes, move up homes and whatnot. If you pair the idea that we have no density, no change in density with the need for different housing types, different lot sizes, by having those smaller lots, by necessity, you have to have some larger lots, or I guess as Mr. Hanley pointed out, you might have some grouped open space or whatever, but likely if you have smaller homes, you're also going to have larger homes. So instead of having one price point for your move up homes, you're going to get a broader range of move up homes, because for some people, a move up home might be a $600,000 home. For other people, that $1.2 million home is going to be that move up home. And that's the whole point. By creating that diversity, we're going to get multiple price points and better sustainability long term. Thank you, Mr. Magnus. And that graphic is referred to in the section that talks about LDR, not the one that's in the RES. So where are we at right now? We have an intent statement. We could vote to approve that intent statement and we've already talked about what that intent statement does, or we can move forward without an intent statement. And it sounds like pretty much everyone's agreed that we should continue this conversation and we should be looking at a diversity of housing types in some sort of granularity, whether that's fine-grained or very coarse-grained mixture of housing types. To me, the bigger question is what do we do in the interim? And again, I wish I knew. Maybe I could ask staff, but or I should have asked beforehand. But even in the time since the future land use map was approved and all of those units were calculated and it was distributed, however, I would guess that we're at 25%, 30% of those units being developed. It would be my off the cuff guess. And that was during the time where we had severe restrictions due to sewer. Now that that's resolved, this is going to move quickly, and we need to decide what are we going to do in the interim while committees are being formed and discussing and taking a deep look at this. And I fear that if we don't do something, that by the time those committees are done, there will be no large tracts of West Provo that are not at least in the process, in the application process, which we have seen in the past, and what this council, myself included, have not been willing to apply the new standards to applications that were at any stage of the process. So whether or not we vote on the intent statement, I think the intent statement is perfectly compatible with everything we've said and everything the Planning Commission has said. And we're basically just asking them to develop the stuff and then explicitly states what are we going to do in the interim. We can go on with no intent statement, but what are we going to do in the interim? What are we going to do for item 5 that's here? If we approve the intent statement, and if we're consistent with the intent statement that we just approved, we would either continue or deny the application that's in number 5, but it gives the developer a route to move forward. They can come back with a proposal which has already been, a concept plan that would satisfy the intent statement. It's already been developed and has a way forward and can move forward that way. If we say, well, we're not going to do an intent statement and we're not going to approve anything, then that kind of locks everyone in and they can't do anything until that planning process is done. And if we're not willing to do that, and if we're just going to approve anything that comes in the interim, then there's really not much point in forming these committees, because it'll all be done before those committees have a chance to recommend stuff to us. So I still think even with the mix up of the drafts, I think the Planning Commission, I think their recommendation, what they did recommend, is actually aligned with that second draft and gives a path forward for developers who don't want to wait for that process to complete, and still moves us away from status quo to a diversity of housing types, which seems like everyone, at least at some level of granularity, agrees with. So to me, that's still the best way forward tonight. However people want to move forward, but I think we need to decide tonight, right now, when we talk about whether to continue, whether to vote yes, or whether to vote no on the intent statement. We need to have a plan in place for what we're going to do in the interim.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Mr. Hoban.
This isn't really directly related to the motion, but I didn't get to make the comment, so I'm going to make it. I think for me, the biggest question is, because I went and drove around the west side today just to get a feel, how diverse is the west side? And for example, where this property is at, if you go a half mile north, you get more density, single family, detached, but you also do have some town, I don't know if they'd be twin homes or townhomes. I think it's 0.6 miles to be exact. You go, 3/4 of a mile this way, a mile that way, and you do have a diversity of housing types on the west side. So I understand, I totally get people don't want to, when they move up, they don't want to switch school district or school zones, or not school districts, but the boundaries, school boundaries. They want their kids to continue to go to the same middle school or same elementary school, but you on the west side, there are a lot of places you could move to and your kids would be in the same school. So I guess, I don't know if this is, a question for you, Mr. Harding, or Mr. Hanley, who sounds supportive of this as well. But I guess I don't understand why we need to get so granular, because I do feel like there is a diversity of housing on the west side. Now, I mean, if all of the remaining RES zones end up 1/4 of an acre, $1 million homes, I think there's probably a problem with that. But I guess I'm just thinking, I don't see why we need to get so granular, because people can move up and stay in the same school boundaries, and they're not going to be in the same ward, probably not the same stake, but if I guess I don't totally understand the need for it to be so granular, like within a 10 or a 20 acre plot. Because when I drove this property, I've done it twice now, just try to get a feel for which, by the way, it's an awesome area. I love that the river's right there and everything. I guess I was kind of looking around and thinking, if all of this was single family, 1/4 acre, I don't think, it didn't seem like that was a terrible thing. Again, if that's all we had in all the RES zones from here on out, maybe that's not the right thing to do, but I didn't feel like it was so out of place to have that there. And I get what you're saying, we have to make decisions now because there's not a ton of plots left where there's 10, 20, 30, 40 acres. But I don't know. That's my big picture question. Whether I support this or not is, why is it necessary ultimately if people can move around on the west side, stay in the same school boundaries, still live close to friends and family, and, have different housing types that they move into, as opposed to within a 20 acres plot, 23 acre plot.
Thank you, Mr. Hoban. Mr. Harding.
I think that question was directed at me. So I would actually be interested to hear Mr. Shipley if you wanted to share his thoughts on that. One thing I would respond to, two things, I guess. One, I do think it's a best planning practice to have that tighter integration. Sorry, that's not the terminology I want to use. More fine-grained mixture of housing. I think that having that diversity of people in different life stages is healthy for a community. I've really appreciated, the grandmothers in my neighborhood that my kids were able to get to know because their grandparents don't live in the city. And, we've talked about different areas of this. Different people will move to different areas because of, they're attracted to different things. And I agree. And I love about Provo that we have very distinct areas. And I don't live there, but I love West Provo and for all the things that it offers. It's a wonderful thing. But, just because someone can't afford $1 million house doesn't mean that they're not looking for that kind of thing. So I think it's helpful to have, housing that at different price points throughout. And I do think that the finer granularity is better. The other point that I wanted to make is, this is a little bit more nuanced of an argument, but the Planning Commission and sometimes builders and others have talked about, well, if we transfer some density from this area to that area, and if you start, when we've done that with the future land use map, where we said this can be at the 4 units to the net gross net, whatever acreage. And then we have other areas that are the LDR. So we've already kind of distributed it that way. But within developments, we've talked about you can move things around and whatnot to make that fit the best. But if you start borrowing, density from other plots, now people that develop later are left with, less units to the acre. It gets very complicated. And other communities have created these huge programs to transfer development rights. One of the beautiful simplicities of this proposal is you're not doing any sort of density movement between developments. Everything is self-contained. So whether you develop tomorrow or whether you develop in 15 years, you haven't had someone, take units away from you. And you can't really, so if you're not going to do it like globally, then you kind of have to do it per development so that you get that density there. Either that, you either have to do it per development, or you have to have some broader program that shifts things from one area to the other. And you're kind of picking the winners or losers, or allowing the people to get there first to take the best number of units. So it actually simplifies a lot of things, even though this seems complex and I don't do a very good job of keeping things simple. But this is actually a fairly simple and elegant way to handle that. There are some complexities to it, but it actually simplifies things overall.
Mr. Shipley.
So a couple different thoughts that I have. So first of all, I live north, probably where you were driving around, Travis, when you just get north of this development. And I'm part of a starter home community that happened in the mid-90s of probably 1,000 units. I mean, just an incredible large swath of mid-90s starter homes, that all look, my model, there's probably 500 of them of the exact same model. So it's an example of when you tell a developer, here, average this amount of units per acre, and you don't give them any more than that. That's how you maximize profit, right? You just crank out the exact same unit over and over again for acres and acres and acres. So my neighborhood is a good example, or a bad example, if you want to say that, of not a very diverse area. We don't attract a very diverse demographic. Obviously, our houses are about the same price, in my neighborhood, and we get about the same type of family in my neighborhood, and they're all going to age together and not age very well at some point, right? Because they're all starter homes. So something that you kind of said out loud a few times, Mr. Hoban, that I think is kind of the point of this. Why get granular? The point, and to your question that you kept raising or alluding to, is if we don't do something, then we're going to have developers give us kind of this cookie cutter approach for all the rest of the land that we have zoned as RES, right? Or at least land use mapped as RES. And I think we can all agree that we'd like some diversity among what's left of the RES. And so specific to the development that we'll look at, I'm excited about some higher end homes, in my area on the west side. I think it's a beautiful spot. I think it'd be a great location for some higher end homes. What I don't want to happen is if we say, hey, we don't need to look at this intent statement. We don't need to consider this. We don't need to give any kind of signaling to developers. And then we end up with, my neighborhood over and over again on the west side, which is a builder gets really efficient at a certain home. And then our zoning allows for them to just build thousands and thousands of units that look and feel the exact same to create neighborhoods that are really cookie cutter. I think the planning commission is trying to avoid that. I think our planning department would love to avoid that. I think most of us would like to avoid that. And I think it's important for us to address this sooner than later and get ahead of this so that we don't end up with that. I don't think that this one development creates that. But I do think that if we don't get this figured out, that we could end up with that. So I think it's important to look at this. I think it's important to clarify this. One of the comments that I wanted to make earlier was I disagree a little bit with Mr. Harding in the fact that I think the Planning Commission was looking and addressing something different than what we hoped that they would look at and address. And so I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say that they were looking at the same thing and we can just move forward with this intent statement. I would rather continue, that's just my opinion. And I would rather have them look at trying to help us with ideas for zoning. I thought that's what we were telling them to do, was to give us some ideas for potential, zone changes that could help us have more flexibility, but also help us prescribe better diversity of housing types within our zones. Right now, when somebody goes from, when somebody looks at a property, a developer looks at an RES zone or a land use map that's scheduled for residential, and they're told 4 units per acre. I think what we're just mapping to them is to get this cookie cutter approach. And so if we want diversity of housing, I think we've got to do a little bit more than what exists right now with our current zoning. And again, I thought that's what we were sending, as the conversation surrounding this intent statement to help us signal to developers that we want more than, Dave Shipley's neighborhood over and over again on the west side, right? I mean, I've got a great neighborhood, but I don't want to see 1,000 tract homes over and over again, throughout the west side. So anyway, I think it needs to go back. I think it needs to be discussed. And then I would like the planning commission, but also our planning department to help us understand how we help our zones, if need be, to help these developers go beyond just, hey, we gave you a zone. We have these 2 different zones, right? LDR and these different res zones. And yes, we have VLDR, but most of it's future land. Most of it, what we're signaling is you've got one or the other, right? And with one or the other, you're just left to maximize profit on that property. Well, if under the current zoning, you're just going to do the same kind of thing over and over again on the west side. And so I think that needs to change. I think we need to figure out how we change that. I don't know if it's an intent statement or if it's actual zoning rules and ordinances and policies, but either way, I think it needs to be discussed further.
Councilor Ellsworth.
This is off the topic of process, but it has a lot to do with what's just been said. I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Shipley, and I hope that was a effective persuasion. This is not the only area in the city where I've been concerned about homogeneous housing types. If we keep certain quadrants of the city with very homogeneous housing types, we're not bringing the old and the young together. We're not bringing the new residents and the old residents together. We're not creating proximity between people of extra resources and people with too few resources. And I think that by bringing those groups together, we create a more vibrant, a more sustainable, more compassionate community. And Mr. Sewell talked about where he lives and how the homes aren't $1 million, but I imagine some of those homes are probably 50 years old. And if there was a quarter mile away, townhomes, brand new townhomes that are $500,000 that are lovely, I think that would bring a lot of interest and vibrancy and sustainability to that smaller sub community, to have people who have lived there for 50 years and have a large yard who probably need help with their yard in the near future, and people who have a townhome and are younger and have the ability and the time and the energy to help them in their yard. And that's the kind of community that I'd like to foster. And if we can do that through planning, then let's do it.
We have some of those right next door, by the way. Some of those townhomes. Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been furiously making notes about this. This is a complex issue, a lot of competing considerations, and I appreciate the effort Mr. Harding's put into this statement of intent. It's obviously has the fingerprints of a very bright engineer on it who's thought deeply about the problems and trying to come up with a thoughtful resolution. I'm not sure how to proceed, whether we send it back to the Planning Commission or we amend the intent statement or something else, but I did want to express some general observations. As a general matter, I'm in favor of increasing intermediate or step-up housing. I think we've got to do that and fill a void there. We have plenty of high density and medium density housing in the city. Some would say too much. Certainly have more than our share compared to other communities in the county. Largely a function of student population, married students, and so on. But I really think that we need to see more intermediate housing. And I think that would blend well with some of the plans for the Southwest area and the single family plans. I'm not opposed to integrated mix of housing. I think it does create more vibrant neighborhoods when you have a housing mix. I think sometimes the debate is posed in terms of single family homes versus townhomes, and that's not the only options, right? I mean, there are townhomes, there are condos, there are duplexes, fourplexes, cottages, there's all kinds of things. And I think the key is high quality design standards. There are cottages and duplexes and condos that look wonderful. Several in my area. If the design standards are good, then I think that it all works out pretty well. I think the word du jour today seems to be granularity, and I think you've got to have some definition to what you're doing. I feel like the current intent statement for my taste is a bit too granular. Philosophically, I prefer giving a little more flexibility to our expert planning people, taking advantage of their expertise and their creativity, so they have some flexibility. We don't straitjacket them. I feel that generally also the neighborhood consensus deserves disproportionate weight. People living in the area, people most affected by our decisions, their consensus, if they have one, merits considerable weight for our deliberations. I also feel that, again, design standards are one of the keys. And if we do that, then we can have diverse housing, not necessarily in each development, but in a larger area. We have a little more diversity, and I think it does create greater vitality and long-term sustainability. We just got to take into account what our apparent infrastructure limitations. That was, I guess, a bit of a revelation to me to understand that we're already pretty well locked into the 4 per acre in terms of our infrastructure. I don't think anybody has an appetite, given all the money we're having to lay out for the current capital needs in the city. I don't think anybody has an appetite for major redevelopment of our infrastructure on the west side to accommodate higher density. Anyway, those are my thoughts, but I think there's got to be a way to find a balance there that gives us some diverse housing, but takes into account the neighbors' apparent consensus.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. I wanted to mention there's two parts to this intent statement. I don't know if we can pull that up again, but there's two parts to this. There's one that addresses the RAS, future land use areas on the map, and then there's also the one that addresses the LDR zones. And if this versus the status quo, which we've seen what has happened in the last 4 or 5 areas. Actually, if you'll scroll up to the first part, the text there, I'm not going to actually read it, but you can see there that open bullet point is the part that talks about the LDR. We know what's going to, based on what has happened, we have a good idea what's going to happen. That's the status quo. And if we enact this intent statement or move in that direction versus the status quo, we're going to have far more single family detached, because this would add a little bit of mixture in the RAS areas, but would give us quite a bit different product than what we're getting in the LDR area. So we would actually get far more of these single family detached and move up homes with the intent statement versus the status quo, or some sort of change versus the status quo. You talked about a lot of different housing types. If you'll scroll up just a little bit, Mr. Magnus, appreciate you driving for me here. There's a pretty good list of twin homes, townhomes, mansion homes. It describes what those are. Duplexes, cottages, pocket neighborhoods, clustered homes with a shared driveway. So those are all things listed here as ways to satisfy this intent statement. And again, if we don't look at this as the intent statement puts in the code, the language into code, but it also is not a standalone. This is not intended to become the policy. It's an interim holding pattern until we can get those recommendations developed and that language put in and the graphics created. It allows people that are currently working on developments to not be in limbo, to be able to move forward with something that gets us closer to what we're aiming for while we take the time to develop that. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. And I just wanted to, Mr. Parker. I don't know if you have a comment, please.
As I've observed the dialogue in the last couple of meetings, it strikes me that there's a lack of clarity about your expectation of the Planning Commission. And I've just been chatting with our staff and wondering about advancing the idea of asking you to include in your requests to the Planning Commission maybe 5 to 7 specific questions you'd like them to give you feedback on. One option would be for them certainly to just go through this and do put it in a Word document and strike out and highlight and add comments. And I think that would get, you might get their feedback, but again, it might be not at all what you want. And so I'm thinking of questions like, is this list of alternative housing types comprehensive, acceptable to the Planning Commission, something they'd feel good about? Again, I think if we could identify some very specific feedback you're looking for, I think you're going to get a much better response than saying, send this to the Planning Commission and get some feedback on it from us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Just trying to bring, again, not to overuse the granularity term, but to bring a little bit more precision to the question so that you get what you're looking for from the Planning Commission instead of having it be, a less than specific request and an even less specific response. Does that make sense?
Yes, it sure does. And
so I'm hoping that might at least advance the discussion.
yes, I appreciate that. And was kind of thinking along similar lines in the comment I was about to make. I think what we're not asking for the Planning Commission to just give us a up or down on the exact wording. I hope they can really advise us on this difficult question. I really like the idea of giving them specific questions. On the other hand, if we try to come up with those tonight, I don't know, we may be here for a while. Maybe as an alternative, if they could just kind of look at the statement and they've already started to discuss this and try to figure out the issues we're grappling with, like the size of the area it should apply to, and some of the things that you mentioned, and just give us a general list of recommendations, not necessarily just we like this statement or we don't.
I think it's going to be harder to get what you're after if we don't at least reduce it to some level of specificity. You kind of got a response that said, well, we just don't like it. And again, granted that it was the wrong draft and, there were some issues there, but again, as I've kind of watched the dialogue this evening, it just seems to me like, the better the questions you could ask of the Planning Commission, the more likely you are to get an answer that will be helpful. So again, that would just be my suggestion. I don't typically weigh in on issues like this, but I would almost rather you take some more time to make sure that the questions you get are right than just sending it to the Planning Commission tonight and saying, you heard our dialogue, what do you think? I don't know, that just be my suggestion about just trying to get off of dead center on this.
Thank you, Mr. Hoban.
So I don't feel like we're in a good position to try to come up with 5 to 10 questions tonight. So Mr. Jones, could we do this via email? I mean, we're not voting on anything. We're just trying to brainstorm questions that we want to send to the Planning Commission, right? Could we perform that task?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no reason why you couldn't start an offline discussion and start circulating drafts. Again, because you're not actually passing legislation, you could even come to an agreement about what those questions were without coming back to a meeting, as long as there is agreement amongst you that there is a set of questions that should go to them for input.
Councilor Ellsworth.
That was going to be my statement is if we do have these questions for the Planning Commission on the things that we want their input on, why don't we just send our 2 or 3 questions to Cliff or to staff and have them consolidate, combine, prioritize those, and then they can send them on.
Mr. Harding.
Actually, if I can defer, I see a couple others.
Mr. Fillmore.
I'm just going to say, as always, Mr. Parker is the voice of experience and reason. I think that's a great idea. Let's do it online after the meeting and see if we can come with consensus on those questions. I don't want to wait 2 more weeks on this. Let's get it going.
Mr. Sewell?
Yes, Mr.
I don't know if you could see my hand or not.
Sorry, I missed you.
I have one simple question. It's sort of what I was saying earlier. What recommendations does the Planning Commission have for creating expectations for developers so that we don't end up with overly homogeneous housing types in big blocks? And how can we, without increasing the density, per acre for the whole area?
Okay.
Yep. I was just going to say exactly that, and maybe just ask and ask if anybody else on the council had something more that you all think we're trying to do here. I think my interpretation of what we were trying to do is get the Planning Commission and planning staff's feedback on how we can create diversity of housing types within some of these developments. And specifically for the West Side, if we have a land use map that says RES in large swaths of land, how are we going to get diverse housing types inside of those blocks of land? And so, I don't have any more clarification than that. I was hoping to get their suggestions, whether it be zoning changes, whether it be intent statements, whatever it needed to be to communicate and direct future developers that we're serious about having diversity of housing.
Mr. Harding.
I appreciate that comment by Mr. Shipley, because I think there's there's a couple layers here, and I think that's what's causing confusion. I think that's what's caused confusion with the Planning Commission the first time, at least for the meeting that I attended. Because I feel like they thought we were asking them for their opinion about how it should look and what the policies should be. And I think even in this discussion where we're like, well, let's find, 5 questions we want them to answer. That's stage 2. That's step 2. And I didn't intend for there to be a step 1. That step 1 was just to pass this intent statement, and then step 2 was to ask them, or that intent statement moves to stage 2, which is ask them to develop these or propose these policies for us to adopt, the language, the zones, and all of that. But that intent statement, which asks them to develop those and propose those, we said, well, let's have the Planning Commission weigh in on whether or not we should ask them to develop these things. And so now we send it to them, and now we're talking about this. We're talking, well, what 5 questions do we want asked? Well, that's stage 2. Stage 1, if we want, we can just pass the intent statement, which just asks them to develop those things. And if we need to tweak the intent statement, or maybe we throw the intent statement out and just ask them to develop these things. But that's all the intent statement does, is ask them to develop these things. And it's pretty broad. How should we, what should the granularity be, and what size should it apply to? Those kind of things. That's what we're asking them to do. But I think they got confused, and I think we're getting confused between the first ask and the second ask. So the second ask, we're asking them to develop these things. The first was just asking them their opinion on us asking them, which I think is so kind of circular. It's very confusing. And then the other thing that the intent statement does is gives developers a path forward in the interim. And I think that's important, because I think if we're going to hold stuff, I don't think it's good. I don't think it would be wise to hold everything up while we wait for those that proposal to be developed. And I don't think we should just pass everything in the interim. So what do we do there? And that's what the other part that the statement says. But the statement, this is not asking, I don't believe the statement is saying this is what the final policy should be. We're asking them to develop it. It's just the statement asks them to develop it and gives developers a path in the interim. And we decided to ask the Planning Commission to give us their recommendation on the intent statement, not necessarily on what we were asking them to develop. Anyway, and I meant for that to be clarifying, and I think I just ran myself in circles again. But the point is if we pass the intent statement, we're asking them to propose stuff, and we're giving developers a way forward in the interim.
Mr. Parker.
Mr. McGinn I thought made a very good suggestion. Historically, and we haven't done it for several years, but we have had a number of opportunities to meet between the council and the Planning Commission in a separate work meeting where you all get around a table and we have a facilitated discussion, and you attempt to at least come to some meeting of the minds without having to go through a very formal process to do it. And again, whether you develop questions or not, or you do it tonight or next week or by email, at some point it might be a good idea to get both bodies together in one room and just talking about it rather than sending things back and forth from one to the other. So I'd just offer that as an alternative someplace in the process.
Thank you.
I just want to say I wholeheartedly agree. I think we should be meeting with the Planning Commission more than once a year, and I would support that for this kind of issue or other proactive issues that we want to address together.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I like that idea, once a year, sooner the better, in the light of this discussion. I have a question. Mr. Harding is concerned, and rightly so, about this interim time and period of time, and not wanting to hold developers in limbo, wondering what's going to happen. I guess I'm not clear on how long this interim period has to be. I'm not sure it has to be a long, drawn-out 6-month study effort. I think it could be expedited. I'd like to think so, that we wouldn't have to worry about interim guidance if we can pull this off in a month or two.
Thank you. And that is a separate question of what we're going to do during this interim period while we're working on this. I'd like to try to attempt to meld three different ideas here. Just throw this out to see what you think. So we do have a motion on the table to refer this statement back to the Planning Commission. And there was also a suggestion, not a motion, but that we each send any specific questions that we may have to Cliff or to staff, have a little bit of an offline discussion that could result in something that we could send to the Planning Commission to help them hone in on what we're looking for. And then third idea would be to schedule a meeting with them as soon as is practical to discuss all of this. So shall we do all three?
Yeah, I'm willing to amend my motion to include those two additions if you'd like, if it's necessary.
Okay, we have a amended motion to.
The amended motion would be to continue this item and that we would forward more specific questions to the council staff who would present those to the Planning Commission ahead of a joint meeting with the City Council and the Planning Commission.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Harding.
I'm supportive of that. In some ways, I feel like that's just skipping over at least half of the intent statement, and it's just going right into asking them for their feedback, and which is what I feel like the first half of the intent statement is. And then, as you pointed out, as a separate question is what do we do in the interim? And so I don't know if we can have that discussion during this item, or if we want to have it at another time. But I support the amended motion, and I think it gets us halfway there.
Okay. Any other comments on the motion before we vote? All right, we'll call. Was that a comment coming there?
What was a double clutch?
Okay. All right. All in favor of the motion?
Yes.
Okay, and that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And then I think with this next item, we'll start to address that other question. Number 5 is an ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 23.5 acres of real property, generally located at 200 North Lakeshore Drive, from agricultural A110 and A15 to residential R18 and residential agricultural RA zone. If any members of the public would like to give a comment for this item, they're encouraged to call in or sign in now. This item will be presented by Brandon Larson.
Okay, thank you, Chair. See if this works. Last time it failed me. It is not working. You want to just advance the slide, go forward a couple. That works. Let's just leave it here. I think that'll be sufficient. So you've seen this before. We've got a request from Jason Bennett to rezone approximately 24 acres of land, approximately Center Street and Lakeshore Drive. Along with this, so I guess I should state what the proposal is. The proposal is to rezone that to the R18 zone. Currently the property is zoned A110. There's a small portion that's A15. He has received approval from the Planning Commission for concept plan. They've approved a concept plan for 69 single family lots on that site. The average lot size is 11,500 square feet. The range of lots are from roughly 8,300 square feet to I think the biggest one is just over a half acre. So you've seen this. We know that based on the current documents,
it's in harmony with the general plan land use designation. It's in harmony with the requested rezones, in harmony with the Southwest area plan. Staff has told you before that we feel like this is, we recommend approval of this. We feel like the city is in need for some additional single family housing. We feel like this is with the mix of lot sizes here, we're going to see some of that intermediate and higher end homes in a development such as this. And so again, we think this is a good location. The city went through a process and determined, a few years ago that this was a good location for single family homes. And so we, based on those previous efforts, staff's recommending approval of this rezone request. And if you have any additional, or if you have any questions, I'm certainly here to answer them. So,
Councilor Ellsworth.
Sometimes we split hairs over the term single family housing, right? In the past, we've had these discussions in this room about single family housing. Is this detached or attached? And maybe we should be more specific when applying that. I guess that's not a question. I'm just concerned that we use that term so broadly when we're talking about very different products.
Detached, for clarification's sake, thank you. Yes, this is, I'll propose detached housing. So thank you, Councilor Ellsworth.
All right, thank you, Mr. Larson. We'll now open this item for public comment. If anyone here or online would like to comment.
Jonathan Hill, Fort Utah neighborhood. I just want to re-emphasize some things. We've seen this item before. Many of my neighbors have commented in various forums, online or in person, in the past. And so I just want to reiterate some things. First of all, I think to answer some questions that came up last time that I didn't have an opportunity to answer. First of all, I believe it was Mr. Fillmore had brought up Center Street issues, and do we need to just widen Center Street and just, bite the bullet kind of thing? And he mentioned UDOT there, and I do want to clarify one thing. UDOT owns a section of Center Street, and that section of Center Street runs from Geneva to 500 West in Provo. Everything out here is city street. It is not state street. It would be the city's cost in order to widen that. And my understanding is it would be somewhere in the order of $50 million with the eminent domain to widen that road. So it does limit what we can do in this area. Also, to Ms. Ellsworth's question earlier about quarter acre lots and prices, just to emphasize how much it varies. In my neighborhood alone, if you're just looking at Fort Utah, in fact, the neighborhoods adjacent to this one, we have R18 and R110 zones. And in these areas, and a few apartments and townhomes kind of mixed in there. In these areas, we have homes that are currently estimated on Zillow, however good that is, at being about $400,000, $300,000, up to about $600,000. And so this brings in that step-up home, which is, in our mind, the type that our neighborhood is missing. Now, an interesting thing, going back to the intent statement here, is that actually as the intent statement is written, this development in our mind actually does meet it. And so this is something you guys have to consider as you're considering the intent statement. Can you bring up that intent statement? Is it still there? So essentially how it does it here is through varieties of lot sizes. And this was something that Brian Henry had used as an example of a way to get good mixture, was by varying lot size and house size on those. Can you just go, up a little bit, right there, that list, okay? So on this list, you kind of consider your R110 standard lot size as like the default, right? And so it's not listed as an alternate housing type here, but that is one type. Then it talks about detached single family homes on lot sizes that are 30% larger or smaller than the mean lot size at the development. So I went back and I looked at this, calculated it out based on the version of the plan that I have. Here's how his lot sizes break down. He has 36 lots that are between 8,000 and 10,000 square feet. He has 18 lots that are between 10,000 and 12,000 square feet. And then 11 more lots that are somewhere between 12 and 16,000 feet. He has 2 that are between 16,000 and 20,000 square feet. And then he has one 20,000 square foot lot, which is a half-acre lot. And he has another that is being requested to be zoned as a residential agriculture. So when we look at this, he has 7 homes that fit the 30% larger than the mean lot size. He also does, because of the configuration of the land, have a clustered home around kind of a shared driveway kind of concept there. And then he also has, if you go to the next page, just down a little bit, one of the ones that is there, one for farmettes or hobby farms for serious gardening. So he has an RA lot that is proposed there. So that is 4 different housing types that make up a total of 15% of the entire development. And so the question becomes, is this a variety that is acceptable? Is this the kind of thing that we could be looking for to create those different income types, and would create a wide range of house values, right? That half-acre lot right on the river and the RA lot, of course, are much more expensive, whereas most of the lots, I think, maybe we should ask the developer, what kind of range would you say the 8,000 lots would be price raised? For the lot, right? And then put a house on it, what would it run? It depends what they build, I guess. Okay, so $400,000, $500,000 in that range, all the way up to probably $2 million for the big fancy lot. So it does have a wide range of incomes. Just to put that in context, the street next to it has quarter-acre lots to third-acre lots with 2,500 to 3,500 square foot homes, and right now their estimated value is somewhere between $600,000 and $750,000. And so it kind of brings in something that fits the neighborhood, but also brings in types that we don't have. Most of the houses in my neighborhood are 300 to 400,000, right? They're starter homes in our area. So with that, I'll take any questions that you guys have on this. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hill.
So I'm Jason Bennett, part property owner with Dan Forward. Couple things on this. One thing I hope you will not change is lot number 68. That's where I plan on building my own personal home right on the river, which is one of the biggest reasons we bought the whole entire property, was so I could build my house on the river. So I hope whatever we do, you guys can make sure that stays a single family detached house. If you guys want to approve for a BLDR zone with restrictions, we would build whatever you guys approve. What we hope is that the 4-plex mansion, 3-plex mansions thrown out because of the garage, the parking, everything involved with those, talking with architects, gets all complicated. So twin homes, duplexes, they're a lot easier to put in. We can actually configure it with already the lots. If you do decide you want a lot more clusters in there, we can do that. It would change the layout a little bit. So if you guys want to approve BLDR zoning and you want to put contingencies on there with that, of course, we paid cash for the land, all the improvements, everything we're paying cash for. Part of our wealth management, we would retain ownership of any duplex townhomes because it'd be part of our wealth management to manage our own wealth. So any of those that we would retain ownership of. Our plans are to sell most of the lots to owners that want to build their own houses. We will not sell to a builder. I do not want a mass builder to come in and build next to my own house. So we will not sell to a mass builder. Our plan is to sell the building lots. People bring their own builders. They build the city ordinance. They build all varieties of houses. Our starting lot price is going to be $150,000. Of course, the lots on the river are going to be a lot more, and they're probably going to be almost houses on the river are going to be over $1 million. There's just, I mean, with cost of building, there's no way of getting that cost down. As part of our wealth management, we do have a lot of other rental properties. We are now paying $400,000 for townhomes, or sorry, condos. We're paying $400,000. We're paying $500,000 now for townhomes. And for 20-plex apartment buildings, we're paying $4 to $5 million for a 20-plex. So I do not see housing costs coming down anytime soon. Lumber, all the building costs are up there. But I hope you guys will approve it. The neighbors would like all single-family detached housing. That's what we came to you to propose. We did draft Dave Harding's plan with the intention of bringing it to you if the neighbors support it, but they were 100% against it. We do like to build with our communities. But if you guys come back and say, hey, you want twin homes or duplexes, I just asked if you would. I was told that you guys could do BLDR zone today with restrictions. So I hope you guys will approve of some zoning, and then, of course, we can get our engineers and architects to design it. We do want to sell most of the single-family lots. All the attached housing, we would want to retain ownership of in our own portfolio. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hanley, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question for the developer. Thank you for being here. It's in reference to what Mr. Hill said. I thought I heard you say at our last meeting that the price range was going to be somewhere between 700,000 and 1.3 million, but he said 400 to 2 million. Could you clarify what you think? I know it's a little bit of guesswork here, but I'd be interested to know which it is.
So we're going to sell most of the building lots. So when someone asks us for what the home's going to sell for, it's really hard to say what the exact house is going to sell for. But the bids that we've got to build a single family 2,500 square foot home have been around $380,000 to $450,000. So if we sold a lot for $150,000, they could be into it $600,000. If they want to build a 1,500 square foot home, they could reduce that cost dramatically on a building. We do not plan on building all the houses. That's like we're trying to give a range for what we envision the houses will be when they're complete. I think most people bringing their own contractors are probably going to build a $500,000-$600,000 house on a piece of property. That's kind of my history. I can't see someone spending $150,000 on a lot and putting a $200,000-$300,000 house on it, but they could. We're not going to restrict that. So that's kind of what the city requires for the people to build.
Thank you.
Rick Smith, I live just south of, this property, and speaking for my neighbors, we strongly support the original proposal that's been presented. We think it has a great, it meets so much of what we're talking about with a variety of lot sizes. There's no cookie cutters here. You're going to have all kinds of different homes. And we think it'll just be absolutely perfect. The neighborhood has had other proposals here that we have boisterously objected to that included all kinds of townhomes and all this kind of stuff that just didn't fit. So we urge your approval of this proposal. And on a broader discussion, I just want to point out, for some reason, your area, Mr. Shipley, and all the farms there are just kind of left out of this broader discussion. There's a lot of land there that has yet to be developed. There are farmers that are not ready to sell. Just as in Southwest, there's a lot of farmers that aren't ready to sell. So there's going beyond the Southwest quadrant, at least into the Northwest quadrant, I think is really important, because there's a lot of land there that's still empty and waiting for the day when it'll be developed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky Bogdan, Provo, Utah. This kind of housing is the kind that we do need in Southwest Provo. And I want to point out another thing that we didn't have a chance to comment on. We are assuming that a certain housing type is going to attract certain people. Osprey neighborhood that was just built in my neighborhood, a third of those homes are occupied by retirees with no kids. I have families with small children. I have families with teenagers, all within those 50 some odd homes that we put in Southwest Provo. Now, I do admit that we have huge patches of the same types of home, but I just sent you guys an email the other day that in my ward, we have old people We have people like me that have a 20-year-old to a 7-year-old. We have people with young kids, but we do not have the housing types for people with 5 kids like me that are very many of them. And so 3 to 5 years, they move because that is not a product that we have, at least in my neighborhood. It's a product that is well needed on the west side. And I think this is a product that is well needed in Fort Utah because they do have some of those same lower demographics. But we are assuming that a homogeneous neighborhood produces a homogeneous person. And I think if we did a housing audit, we would find that that's not true. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? If not, we'll close the public comment portion of the meeting and return this to the council for discussion. Mr. Harding.
So I think this, as you pointed out, kind of gets to the heart of what are we going to do in the interim. I heard Mr. Shipley mention, it wasn't Mr. Hoban, I apologize. That this one development, we wouldn't want to see it homogeneous across the whole Southwest Provo, but in just this one development, it would be, a welcome thing. And I'm open to that kind of argument. Of course, we have approved very similar developments, just, one field over from this to the west, and some others as well. And so, just because they're not on the ground yet doesn't, we already have approved some that are very similar to this. Could I ask staff, because it seemed like 2 years after the future land use map was in place, we still had proposals coming through that had been in some stage of, at some point in the process when that came. How many other projects are somewhere in the application process for the RES areas on this map? I mean, it doesn't have to be an exact number, but if we made an exception for this and said, let's let this one move forward as proposed, are we going to, is it going to be another 8 months of, well, this one was at this stage of the process, this one was at another stage?
You approved 40 lot development about this time last year. You've got this one and then the one from about 3 or 4 months ago. I personally don't have any in my portfolio of applications for this area. I do have one. Well, I have one that's a little farther north up in the Broadview Shores area. I have one plat that it was already zoned. So I don't have any rezones for this area. And Bill, are you just one other? Or one? Just one, yeah. I was aware that there was, I can't remember if it's Dry Creek or whatever, but there's I guess one other.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Yep. And then also in kind of deliberating back and forth, should we either ask this developer to wait until this planning process that we're contemplating finishes, which I don't think is fair? Do we allow this to go forward as proposed, or do we ask that there be some diversity of housing types within? And I'm trying to weigh all of those different options. I wouldn't do the middle one, but do we allow this to go forward, or do we request some diversity of housing types? There's a couple of reasons why I surprise, prefer the latter. And part of it is my esteem of the developer. In talking with him and in his experience and his ability to execute on these different housing types. He has experience that I'm not certain that all developers in Provo has in developing some of these non-single family detached type of homes. He's also indicated a willingness, if that's what is required of him. He's indicated a willingness to move forward and to do these. He's asked, to not be asked to do the mansion homes, but the intent statement, or, if we, ask for some sort of mixture based on, similar to what's in the intent statement. It doesn't require mansion homes. It gives that as one of the options that would help fulfill it. But if he's interested in twin homes and clusters and duplexes or whatever, I think I would, just leave it up to him how he wants to propose to kind of meet the intent, meet the spirit of what we've talked about tonight. And so those are reasons why I think this, and also for the precedents as well, for the precedent that is set, are reasons why I think we should consider requesting some sort of diversity of housing types, because he's capable of doing it and has indicated a willingness. I would be interested. He indicated, perhaps Mr. Jones can help us with that. He indicated that he's been told, or I don't know, maybe other staff, that we could move forward with a VLDR and a development agreement tonight. I don't know if that's true or not, but it seems like in 3 weeks with a proposal from him of what he would like to move forward with, that meets, again, the spirit of what we've talked about tonight. I think we could have this done. Oh, maybe not. Mr. Jones, can you help me out with that?
Remind me with the density, what's the density of RA versus VLDR?
VLDR allows up to 7 units per acre. We, as a staff, suggested to him that it was possible if he was willing to keep the number of units the same.
And what does RA allow?
Half. It allows basically 2 units per acre. It allows 20,000 square foot lots, I believe.
But what the Planning Commission reviewed and has recommended on was R18.
R18 plus there was a little portion up in the northeast corner that's RA.
And so that's where my concern's coming from is as we've discussed in several meetings before, we've always taken the approach that once you have a Planning Commission recommendation that's reviewed a use, and you're welcome to, in the course of a subsequent of this meeting, change and approve something that is less intensive than the use that they gave their recommendation on. So my one concern would be the part of the property that is intended to be RA, and maybe what you do is you only change the R18 to VLDR and you leave the RA, the part that's proposed to be RA, as RA. That I would feel fine about. You might, if you want to change the part that the Planning Commission reviewed as RA to VLDR, that might be of some concern, if I'm being clear about that. And then to the extent, and then the main question is, can you articulate in this meeting what your concerns are that would need to be addressed by a development agreement clearly enough that we're able to negotiate and execute the agreement based just on that articulation and on the proffer from the developer in this meeting.
And I think I could do that in stipulating the maximum number of units, which based on what it would be if it was RA and R18, set that as the number of units. Already we've said like the default would be, or the original proposal was all single family detached, and so if we had the alternative housing that above a certain percentage or something, and then allow the developer to decide how he wants to use that, I would be comfortable moving forward with that tonight. So that's what my preference would be, but I don't think it's the end of the world if we just approve what as proposed, with the hope that we quickly get the rest of this stuff in place. But again, I have a lot of esteem for this developer, and I think because of that, I have confidence that he could execute this very well and set a very good precedent for other developers to pattern after.
Mr. Shipley. Mr. Harding, can you follow up with something Mr. Hill said about meeting your intent statement?
Happy to. There's the way that I see this, and if we actually have the, thank you. If we have his concept plan with us, if we could pull that up. But the way I look at that is that we have a couple of large lots on the river, which I think is great. But then the rest of it is pretty much as close as you can, to have functionally the same plot size for the oddly shaped property and the roads that are already there. So kind of that the shape of the property and the roads that have to go in kind of dictate. Thank you. That's not the right plan. It's not that one either. And thank you for driving on the fly. I know we're throwing this out and you're doing great, but there it is. So the variation in size, I think, is mostly just trying to get a functional size. You have some flag lots in there. You have some corner lots, and you have some kind of triangular lots. And I think that's basically to get roughly the same size house on each plot, and then you kind of draw the lines where, to make them fit. So I don't think there's like real variety in housing, lot sizes that would accommodate differences in housing sizes and different price points. Now that's coming from a layman. I'm not an expert on this, but that's how it strikes me. So other than the two large ones up in the top right corner, I don't see this as being, fulfilling the spirit of having a variety of lot sizes.
But you could agree that maybe it speaks to how our intent language might have to be adjusted, because if this meets your intent language, then maybe we're not getting what we wanted.
Yeah, I'd have to compare calculations with Mr. Hill. Oh, there he is. When I calculated it, I did not get over the 10%. So that's a very good point. And that's why I think it's so important that the planners and the planning commission get to go after this and get us some good stuff. And then again, the intent statement is just interim stuff with the idea that we're trying to indicate our intent to developers that are going to try to move through it in the process in the meantime. And we're looking for proposals that meet the spirit, and that's what we're going to vote on. So I know that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but.
Well, so a quick follow-up then to where we are now at this point. I made a comment earlier about my neighborhood, and it probably sounded like there's nothing like this that I could ever support. I think selfishly, I'd love to see this project. I think it's a great fit for my area. I think it's a great opportunity for move-ups. I think having, some decent sized lots along the river right next to a new park. I mean, this is just a phenomenal area. Obviously, I don't need to sell it more than it's going to sell itself. It's going to be a great spot. The fact that we don't have one builder building all the same type of model, the fact that we have different lot sizes, that's why I wanted to kind of speak to that, because if there is enough variety in lot size, I don't think our current zoning, again, this goes back to the question of maybe it's beyond intent statement that needs to be fixed here. Maybe it's a zoning issue. And for me, I think this type of project is a good fit. I think it's the type of housing that we don't have on the west side. I tend to agree with the comments that have made along those lines. I think new housing that's larger like this would be nice. Having said that, I'm very concerned again, and I've mentioned this, that we've got a bunch more properties, and we're going to end up with stuff like my neighborhood if we're not careful. And so I think we need to do some planning work, but as far as I'm concerned, I could vote for this tonight, and I think it would be a good project for my area of town. So,
Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Mr. Shipley, do you see this as fitting the spirit of the intent statement?
Well, that's why I say, does it fit based on his math? And I think if his math is, there's a 30% difference in size of lot for enough of these properties on a project this size, then I think, I think it does. Or we need to consider a different intent, completely, we need to throw out the intent and say we need to start over because it's not getting us. For me, there's enough differentiation on this property to say, if we're going to have 4 per acre and we're going to have this much variety in lot size and looking at it, I see some of these internal lots, they look more like the smaller sized properties. And I see most of the exterior lots being a larger, I shouldn't say most of them, a lot of them being a larger, bigger lot and a different type of home. And so I think there's some differentiation here. I think it's different than what we already have on the west side, which is a bigger picture issue for me too, is like, look, we don't have a lot of new housing stock that's nicer on the west side. And so anyway, I'm supportive of that generally, but again, we've got a big enough swath of property between this project and when we get over to D.R. Horton, we got this big, I think we got to be careful about one builder coming in like they did in my neighborhood and just building a cookie cutter project, for thousands of units. This isn't my neighborhood. This is something that could be very unique. I think it will look different. I think it'll be diverse and I think it fits. I think it's a nice fit for my area.
I do have a comment. I used to draw lot lines like this. I used to I still work for a civil engineering firm, just a different civil engineering firm. And so this used to be my job from 8 to 5 was to draw these subdivisions. And to me, these lot sizes are very similar in size. And maybe it takes that experience to recognize that, but they are very, very similar. And I will just say that I don't think that lot size is the only characteristic that we're trying to determine a good plan with or create a good community with in this Westside development intent statement.
Mr. Hoban?
Yeah, I think it might meet the letter of the law for the intent statement. I don't think it meets the spirit of the law, if that's what you were going for. But I actually want to approve it. So I don't think in 30, 40 years, we're going to regret approving this, this development. I think, it seems like we usually have pushback from neighborhoods on developments and the developer, found a way to make the neighborhood happy. And I also think just in general, I think it is a good fit for that specific area. And again, I'll go back to, I don't think we would want this everywhere in RES on the west side. So I can get behind an intent statement and, trying to figure out how we put together an intent statement that does add more diversity on the west side and such. But I would say, I can't think of a reason not to approve this tonight, but I think it sounds like there's a couple of us that are okay with that. I can't really read the room right now, but that's where I stand. So I'm helping others read the room if they want some help there.
Well, I like the project. I think when you sell to individual homeowners that are each bringing their own builder, you're just naturally going to get a wide variety in housing sizes and expense. We saw that in our neighborhood. I think the lots in our neighborhood are even more homogeneous than this, but we have a pretty good, there's a minimum square footage required, a restrictive covenant, but beyond that, there's quite a variety in the size of the houses that were built there. And I think you'd see the same thing here. Mr. Fillmore.
Yes, I'll chime in and say that I'm in favor of this project as is. I don't think it affects really our overall hopes or plans for the Southwest area if we approve this particular project. I think there will be some variety, but I'm also swayed by the fact that the neighborhood seems almost unanimous in wanting it.
Mr. Hanley.
Yeah,
I'm really struggling with this. I did not know that this was going to be individually built, so that actually is somewhat reassuring to me. I think I'm still concerned about, I actually do want to see higher end homes. I just, a large block of them that starts at 600,000 or 700,000 to me seems of concern to me, without any more lower diversity there. So I would prefer to see a little more of a mix of types there, as we've been talking about. But I, also understand how the neighborhood feels. I know how, I respect how the two counselors who represent the Westside feel. So I'm kind of ambivalent about it. I think I would prefer to wait to see this larger process of the intent statement get worked through. But I can also understand why that would be a significant delay to this process. So that's why I'm kind of just hanging on the fence here, struggling with it. But it sounds to me like I may be in a minority if I oppose it. So I don't know that it makes a huge difference. I just like the idea of having a little bit more of a mix here, ideally.
Mr. Harding.
I think I forgot the main thing that I was going to say, but we talk about, a move up as a needed housing type. And we're back to this on the other one. We were showing the different concept plans. And if you notice that the mixed concept plan still is 85% large lot, single family detached, and another 10% single family detached, but smaller lots, and then just a couple of the others. So, we're still getting a majority of this housing type, but if you hold the density the same and you have some smaller things, you're also going to have some larger as well. And so it gives us, high end mixture as well. I think I'm going to vote. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. I think I'm going to vote no on this, just because I've indicated earlier that I'm going to have a hard time voting yes on proposals coming forward that don't have the mixture. But this is not one that I'm going to lose sleep over. I think we've had a very productive discussion today, and I look forward to this in the future. I think the DR Horton proposal, the initial sketches that I've seen, have some of this diversity in it. So I'm hopeful that this is the last one that we're going to get of kind of mostly one type. The other thing I wanted to mention is, anytime where we're working out these policies on the fly, it's going to hang people up. And I appreciate Mr. Bennett and his patience, and whether he liked it or not, he kind of had to be patient with us, but he's been very good to work with. And I appreciate his patience in this project. And as difficult as we have made this, by not having this worked out ahead of time, I hope that you consider other plots of land in Provo, because again, I sincerely have high esteem for you and your abilities. And I think once we get these policies in place, or while we're working out these policies, you might find some other areas that you can help develop. And I think Provo could use more of what you have to offer. So thank you for that. And again, thank you to all of my colleagues for this discussion. And I think we're headed in the right direction.
All right, let me just throw one last thing in. I do also feel like we're heading in the right direction, and I can envision once we get through this process that developers could have a little clearer map and bring forward projects right from the start that have a little bit more variety, which I think would be great. But I'm still very supportive of this project. So. All right, if there's no further comments, let's vote. All in favor? Mr. Hanley?
No. I'm sorry, I was distracted. Yeah, can I retract my vote?
Okay.
Thank you. So was I.
Okay, I'm going to have to start over. I could have forgotten. Let's do that one more time. All in favor? Okay, and Mr. Hanley, I'm sorry. What did you vote?
No.
Okay, so we have 5 counselors in favor and Mr. Harding and Mr. Hanley opposed. Thank you. If there's no objection, we will adjourn by unanimous consent.